curse of the abandoned school forever. The bell at Riverton High never rang for her. Mara Jensen had expected emptiness, the polite cleanness of a sealed place. But the first sound when she pushed the iron gate was not silence. It was a careful, slow intake, like a building drawing breath. The cracked crest above the steps watched her with a blankness that felt deliberate. She tightened her scarf and stepped forward with a notebook balanced on her palm, thinking of documentation and dates, of how time curved around abandoned things. Inside, the corridor held a memory of movement rather than movement itself. The echoing spacing of absent footsteps, lockers yawning like mouths, paint peeling in long vertical tiers. A single oscillating fluorescent tube hummed half-heartedly, throwing a jagged shadow that crawled along the linoleum. Mara knelt to photograph a locker tag on the floor, a tiny brass number tied to frayed twine, and the air around it felt colder, as if the building had leaned in to look. Her breath fogged the camera lens before she realized she was holding it. She found the mural at the end of the hall, where children had once been painted in oversized smiles. Mildew had taken a bite, faces blurred into smudges, and colors gone to ghosts. Someone had written a name along the lower edge with hurried, cramped letters. Mara traced the ink with a fingertip and felt the wall give the faintest tremor, as if whatever wrote the name had only just left. She recorded every detail, the urge to document Ward with a deeper, animal reluctance to pry harder. When the pocket watch appeared, it felt like an answer folded into a question. It lay in the doorway of the old auditorium, silver, its face frozen at 11:57, a small scrawl of dust on the glass, like a fingerprint. Mara picked it up, and the metal was warm in a way that made her skin prickle, not warmed by the sun, but carrying a history of being held. She checked its back for initials, something to anchor it to a name, and found only a faint smudge where a nameplate had worn away by repetition. The auditorium smelled like old cedar and forgotten applause. Rows of moth-eaten seats stood like tired witnesses, and the stage was a stage because someone still believed in stories. Mara followed a trail of tiny, methodical markings drawn along the edge of the proscenium arrows, one after another, careful and patient, until they disappeared beneath a heavy curtain. She hesitated, certain the curtain would be the boundary between cataloging and unraveling, and then pulled it aside with hands that were steadier than she felt. Behind the stage was a small storage room, and in its dimness, Mara found a notebook zipped inside a torn gym bag. Its pages were a tight, sloping maze of handwriting names, times, and little diagrams of the school's hallways. Margins repeated a single symbol, a looping question mark, as if the author had been trying to ask the building something and kept rerouting the sentence back to doubt. As she read, a thought arrived with the bluntness of a stone. Someone had been mapping not the rooms, but the ways the rooms returned to themselves. As dusk gathered, corridors rearranged themselves in the way rooms sometimes do when no one watches. A familiar turn opened onto an unfamiliar plaster patch. A stairwell ended on a service door where it had never been. Mara tested her notes against reality and found the mutable arrows in her drawings no longer pointed where they had pointed. watch in her palm clicked once, a clean, impossible sound, and stopped. Her phone displayed a time that argued with the one frozen under glass. Somewhere far off, the bell tower breathed again. She met a shadow that wasn't a shadow. In the science wing, a silhouette leaned against a locker, not quite separate from the darkness, but outlined by the flicker of a failing light. It had no face she could trust, only a suggestion, like an erased photograph. And when it turned, Mara felt as if the building had remembered a student who no longer existed. The silhouette pointed once toward an oak teacher's desk in a classroom down the hall, then dissolved into the hum. Mara's throat tightened with questions that had no names. At the desk, Mara found the hidden compartment slightly ajar. Inside was an envelope yellowed with age, and a single sheet folded around something soft. She unfolded it to reveal a child's drawing of the school, accurate in odd, specific ways, and a pressed clover that had kept its green against the dust. On the back of the drawing, a scribble read in an adult hand, "I'm keeping time for you." The sentence should have comforted, and instead felt like a contract signed in haste. Her recordings began to misbehave. Audio captured a soft rubbing noise that was neither wind nor fabric, and video showed angles that hadn't been in her line of sight. In playback, the corridor where she'd taken a single step a minute before showed, instead, a long, patient queue of smaller footprints leading toward a classroom she hadn't entered. The camera's timestamp neared midnight, although the windows held the ashen light of evening. Each device told a different, earnest story, and none agreed with the world at her feet. Fatigue made the edges of things softer and more persuasive. Mara convinced herself several times that she could leave and make sense of everything with daylight and colleagues. Each attempt was thwarted by trivial obstructions that thickened into intent. A door jammed until she tried another, a lock that clicked open when she stood back, a corridor that extended into a room whose windows refused to show the outside. The school was patient and practiced in its work of keeping people close enough to notice and too far to comprehend. When she finally reached the tower, breath rasping in the stairwell, the bell hung crooked and unused, its rope frayed to a single loose strand. The watch in her pocket began ticking again with a temperament that matched the floorboards. At the lip of the tower, the town glowed below like an argument she had been excluded from. For a heartbeat, Mara thought she understood the promise stitched into the school's quiet. It kept what it loved by holding it in a pause. Then the rope moved with a patience that belonged to seasons, not people. She pulled on instinct rather than courage. The bell did not ring in the way a bell is supposed to. It folded the air, and the stairwell answered with a set of steps that did not match the ones she had climbed. On the landing, the world rearranged itself into a classroom she had never entered. Desks sat in neat rows, each with a small brass tag on the wood. On the frontmost desk, where a nameplate had once been, the letters had been buffed away until the wood shone. The room was waiting, and Mara felt the line between curiosity and captivity thin and taut. She left with her work incomplete. At the gate, she realized the watch was missing from her pocket. Where it had been, a thin trail of ash-like dust led back toward the school like a map made of absence. Her footage was corrupted in places where the school's shape seemed thickest, but a final clip remained. A slow pan down a hallway she had never walked, ending on a locker, then the mural, then nothing. The last frame was a small, hurried scrawl on the wall. Forever, written with a hand that trembled and then stopped. Mara drove away, the road folding into the ordinary, and each day afterward, a different clock argued with the one she remembered.